Good evening, everyone. We're about to pick up on page 32. Changing the subject as they began climbing upstairs, Kerry told her, "We've called your parents and they should be coming down to the station soon. They didn't come last night, and that's why the social services agent came in the first place." "Except she was bad," Amber said. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Kerry told her. "It's okay. I got away." "It's fine if you get away," Amber responded, and climbed the stairs. "Do you have an elevator?" she asked. "In the building? Yes, we do. It's down for repairs right now, though," Kerry said. "Are you tired, Amber?" "No, I just wandered," Amber said. In truth, she was tired. She hadn't slept much the previous night. Kerry smiled and said, "You can go color as soon as we get to our floor, okay?" Amber nodded. As her hand went up to grip the railing, Kerry noticed a bruise exposed on her upper arm when her t-shirt pulled up. Children got bruises all the time, but this looked like a fairly large one. They stepped through the door, and Kerry led Amber into the vacant witness room with the crayons still there. She sat down across from the little girl and asked her quietly, as soon as the door closed, "Amber, I'd like to talk to you." "We've been talking," Amber replied. "No, not so much in private. I want you to know you can tell me anything, and I promise I'm not going to get you into trouble, okay?" "Sure," the girl said, growing cautious. "I want to talk about the bruise on your arm." Amber's hand went instinctively to where the bruise was, and she said, "I fell playing football." "With Kyle?" Kerry asked. "Yeah," Amber said. "He's not very good. He's got rotten aim." "Ah," Kerry nodded, not believing any of it. "How about we get you another t-shirt? I'm sure you'd like to change clothes, and we've got extra clothes about your size." The morgue frequently had unclaimed clothes in storage, as did the lost and found. "No, I'm good," Amber said. "I like these clothes." Kerry sighed. There was only one other way to do this, other than forcing the poor child. "Okay, Amber. I'm going to let you color, and I'll be back as soon as I hear something about Kyle." "Are you going to tell my parents I'm here?" Amber asked. Kerry could see the fear in her eyes. "Yes, I have to tell them. You're not going to get into trouble, I promise." Amber shook her head. "Yeah, I will." "I'll make sure they don't punish you," Kerry leaned in and met Amber's eyes. "Amber, when you go home, what will happen?" Amber averted her eyes. "Nothing," she said. "If you told me, I could make sure they never do it again." Kerry suspected what was going on here, but she understood that like most abused children, Amber wouldn't admit it. "They don't do anything," Amber said firmly, her voice elevating slightly. Amber is the classic case of child abuse, Kerry thought sadly. "Okay, Amber. I'll be back as soon as I know something." Kerry got up and walked out of the witness room. Looking behind her, she saw that Amber had begun to color. Greg approached her with an electronic writing pad and said, "Here you go, ma'am. Results of the search. Satellite and drone views were all corrupted. He had a license plate cover and a cover on the brand name, but I did get Thomas Greenville's whereabouts in the last 72 hours, and information about his last 5 choices." Kerry nodded, pleased. She read over everything quickly and skimmed through the choice results. She wasn't expecting to get aerial images anyway, but they had to give it a shot. Not surprisingly, nothing looked suspicious. Thomas Greenville was most certainly a fabricated agent placed in the system. The information about his location in the last 72 hours, however, was all collected via satellite and drone images and electronic scans. When he entered any government building, he had to complete a thumb scan. He had been in 3 government buildings. "We've got his locations, though, so all we have to do is figure out where he went in between those visits to those buildings," Greg said. Kerry nodded in agreement. "Start working on that, Mr. Banning. Good work here." Greg was about to walk away when Nikki jogged up to them. "Someone's called in information on the Amber Alert," she said. "Kyle was seen alone near the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier." "Let's go," Kerry said immediately. "Mr. Banning, you're with me. Nikki, stay here in case anyone else calls in, and get a second officer guarding Amber." She pulled her phone out of her pocket and flipped it open. A holographic display expanded along the edges of the top screen, making it appear like a small tablet. But Kerry didn't interact with the display. Instead, she voice-dialed Justin as she started to walk toward the stairwell. His holographic image popped up in between the 2 screens of the hinged phone. "CSI Finch," Justin answered, even though he knew who it was. "Justin, we've got a lead on Navy Pier. Take the car and meet us there." "Got it," Justin said. With that, Kerry flipped her phone closed and put it back in her pocket. She turned behind her as she walked down the stairs, making sure Greg was behind her. "I have a question," Greg said as they rounded the landing and continued down the stairs. "When the elevators will be fixed? I don't know, but it's starting to annoy me too," she said. Greg smiled slightly and said, "No, ma'am, different question. Does Amber have a place to stay tonight?" "Not yet," Kerry said, "but I'm going to make sure both of those children have a place to sleep tonight. I'm not leaving until I see them tucked in." They exited the stairwell and jogged toward a car. "I was thinking, if social services isn't able to help while they deal with their security breach, I could take them home with me. I've got an extra room in my apartment, and I can cook." Kerry chuckled. "Cooking and having an extra room might just help. We'll see, Mr. Banning." They got into the car, buckled up, and turned the siren on. Kerry put it in reverse almost instantly after starting the capacitor, and backed out of the space. Then she put it in drive and zipped out of the parking lot, rushing towards city traffic but pushing the car into hover mode a few meters out. There were only 2 ambulances and a few limos in the hover zone, and so she was able to zip above the city streets without having to deal with the ridiculous traffic below. "This would have been helpful this morning trying to get down I-90, Greg mentioned as he checked his weapon and then holstered it again. Trust me, Ogden was worse. At least Autodrive had given her time to eat her breakfast and check her email. "Of course, we can't hover without a true cause," she said, staring ahead. Suddenly, Greg looked alarmed. "No, of course not. That's not what I meant, ma'am," he said. "I would never hover without my siren when I'm off the clock. Or without the siren. Not at all." She had to force herself not to smile at his nerves. "It's all right, Greg. I knew you didn't mean that." "Yes, ma'am," Greg said. Kerry nodded at him and continued to speed toward Navy Pier. She and an ambulance in the hover zone below them passed each other, both sirens going and the Doppler effect making it sound quite interesting. After a few minutes, they were at Navy Pier and zooming toward the Ferris wheel. The nice thing about hover zones was that it allowed vehicles to get past the normal roads and onto pedestrian areas. They came to an abrupt halt in front of the Ferris wheel, looked around, and didn't see Kyle anywhere. Kerry allowed the landing siren to blare before setting the car down in the area now cleared of pedestrian traffic. She put the car in park, powered down the capacitor, and got out, hands on her service weapon in her holster. Greg did the same, and the door slammed shut simultaneously. They saw that Justin and Sarah had pulled up right behind them, and they waited for them to get out of the car. The police were on their way as well, in case they needed backup. "Okay, everyone fan out and start looking. The call said he was by himself but unharmed. This could very easily be a trap, so stay on your toes and wait for backup if necessary. The police are on their way." The CSIs nodded and fanned out. The general public started moving away from the area, but they still watched, wondering what the problem was. They very rarely saw such a show of force on Navy Pier. Excuse me, Greg said, shoving past people to get to the front of the Ferris wheel line. "Sir," he said, flashing his badge to the man in the ticket house. "I'm going to have to ask you to stop admitting people and stop the Ferris wheel." "Sure thing," the man said, and pressed the button. Greg nodded and exited the line. He began looking around that area. Meanwhile, Kerry, Justin, and Sarah looked around. So they didn't instate public panic, they made sure their badges were visible. Navy Pier was crowded, despite the fact that it was a workday in autumn. There were still plenty of people who either had the day off, had called in sick, or didn't work in the first place. Some were already on their lunch breaks. With all the people there, it was extremely hard to pick out a child who was just over a meter tall. It puzzled Kerry why, if the anonymous person had answered the Amber Alert, had said he was alone, that the person hadn't stayed with him. What kind of person would call him in, and then not attempt to keep the child safe from that point forward? Unless, of course, the tip came from the kidnapper who had dropped him off. Sarah and Justin continued surveying the area, while Greg chaperoned people getting off the Ferris wheel and instructed them all to stay put until further notice. None of the people getting off the Ferris wheel happened to be Kyle Warren or Thomas Greenville. Suddenly, a woman passed Sarah, and as she did, Sarah caught a glimpse of the headband she was wearing. It was blue and pink checked, matching the shirt and headband Miss Parker was wearing when she came to get Amber. Sarah said quietly into her radio, "I've got something," as she turned around, pointing her gun at the woman. "Miss Parker," she called. The woman, without turning around, took off in a sprint. A closer look showed Sarah that she wasn't wearing heels, but rather was wearing police-issued dress shoes. Luckily, so was Sarah. She sprinted after the woman, yelling, "Miss Parker! Chicago PD! Stop right now!" Parker didn't stop running, and Sarah couldn't shoot into the crowd. "Make way! Move! Move!" Sarah screamed at the crowd as she shoved past people and continued running. Kerry saw the two women running from a different angle and drew her gun, taking after Parker as well. Seeing the direction they were running, Kerry took a shortcut to come out in front, and as Parker looked behind her, Kerry pointed her gun right at the woman and said, "Miss Parker," quite calmly. Parker stopped in her tracks to avoid running into the gun and looked at Kerry with contempt before turning to take off in the other direction. Sarah was right behind her, though. "Obviously you don't value your life, Miss Parker," Kerry said. Parker said nothing. "On your knees, hands where we can see 'em, behind your head," Sarah instructed. Parker lowered to her knees and put her hands behind her head, and Kerry watched as Sarah cuffed them. "You are under arrest for conspiracy and kidnapping. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law," Sarah recited. When she was finished, Kerry waited until their suspect was on her feet, and then said, "Now, Miss Parker, what can you tell me about Kyle Warren?" Parker said, quite annoyingly, "It is my right to remain silent." Kerry forced herself not to get angry now that the media had just arrived and was filming the arrest. "Miss Parker," she said quietly, but with a tone that suggested she was severely annoyed, "a 7-year-old boy has been kidnapped. We're already charging you with attempted kidnapping. That alone will get you a few years. If you refuse to help us, I won't hesitate to add refusal to cooperate onto that charge. And because this case is life or death for that child, Miss Parker, refusal to cooperate carries quite a bit of weight." Parker just stared at her, expressionless, and remained silent. "Thank you for your help, Miss Parker. It won't go unrewarded," Kerry said, disgusted. "Booker," she instructed Sarah as she walked away toward Greg. Greg was speaking to the people who had been on the Ferris wheel one by one. He couldn't help but think, what a stupid place to drop a kid off. A Ferris wheel, where people are going to see him. Someone intelligent enough to organize a crime like the guy we're dealing with shouldn't have made a mistake like this. "Sir, were you on the Ferris wheel? Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" he asked the next man. "That's fine." "Have you seen this boy?" he asked, and pulled Kyle's picture out on the pad in his pocket. The man studied it, and said, Yeah, I saw him." Finally, Greg thought. "When, and where was he, sir?" "Right over there. He was looking out at the water. About 15 minutes ago. Hey, isn't that the kid from the Amber Alert?" "It is, sir," Greg said. "If you saw him, why didn't you call it in?" The man shrugged. "I only just recognized him." Greg nodded. "What's your name, sir?" "Kim, young Kim." "I need you to stay here, Mr. Kim. I might have further questions for you. Did you see where the boy went?" "He went over towards the popcorn stand, over there." "When?" "About 10 minutes ago." Greg looked toward the popcorn stand and said into his radio, "I've got a possible lead on Kyle's location. Popcorn stand about 15 meters away from the line to get into the Ferris wheel." "Copy that," Justin said, and rushed to Greg's location. Greg saw that Kerry was right behind him. "Mr. Banning, what do we have?" Kerry asked, hurrying towards Greg. At this point they had holstered their guns but left the flap open to make for a fast draw. "Man named Kim said he saw Kyle move toward the popcorn stand about 10 minutes ago. Didn't report him in." Greg shook his head. "With all these people, we're not going to find who reported him in." "Focus, Mr. Banning," Kerry instructed. She saw Justin out of her peripheral vision and said, "Justin, you start looking around the area of the popcorn stand. If he was here 10 minutes ago, he shouldn't have gotten far." Justin nodded and took off to start scanning the area. Kerry and Greg approached the popcorn stand, and Kerry showed her badge to the man behind it. "Have you seen this boy?" she asked him, holding out Kyle's picture. "Yeah, a kid came here about 10 minutes ago. Didn't have any money, but he wanted popcorn. I told him to go find his mother." Kerry closed her eyes. Given the recent nature of Teresa's death, that probably had made the child upset. When children become upset, they often run to a safe place. "Which direction did he go?" Greg asked. "That way," the man said, pointing in Justin's direction. "He started tearing up. I figured he was lost. I called after him, but the kid didn't turn around." The man's eyes turned sympathetic, and he said, "Listen, I would have gone after him, but I got a business to run here. I can't just leave the stand unattended." "Is he lost?" "Yes," Kerry answered quickly and said into her radio, "Justin, Kyle's somewhere near you. We'll be right there to assist." "Copy that," Justin replied through the radio. Kerry took off in that direction, Greg following closely behind her. They were going to find this little boy. They started looking around, fanning out and trying to narrow down their search perimeters. The little boy had probably been in this area for the past 7 minutes, and he couldn't have gotten far. The crowds moved back, making way for the CSIs. Kerry suddenly spotted a blue and white striped shirt and took off quickly in that direction. "Kyle!" she called. And we'll read more tomorrow.